Join me and my guests for a conversation of the future of tabletop RPGs as a hobby and the industry.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the DiceGeeks.com podcast. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and better role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. If you don't know who I am by now, my name is Matt Davids. I write the books of random tables that you can find on DriveThruRPG, Amazon, and my website, DiceGeeks.com. They help game masters cut down their prep time so they can have more fun at the table. If you want to check those out, just head over to Google, type in the Book of Random Tables, and you will find them. Now, I have an amazing show today, so let's not fool around anymore. Here's the interview. My guest today is the managing director and co-owner of Pelgrane Press, Kat Tobin. Kat, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Oh, no problem. It's my pleasure. And if people want to check out the first episode when you were on the show, where we talk about your background and your gaming history, they can find that at dicegeeks.com, or just in Google, you can type in Kat Tobin with Dice Geeks after it, and you will find it in wherever you listen to your podcasts. So, Kat, I really did want to have you back on the show and talk about RPGs, tabletop RPGs, as the hobby and as an industry, because we are in, not only is 2020 kind of a year of upheaval, but there have been quite a few changes over the last few years in the way, frankly, society has changed in the last few years, but also the way business and hobbies are conducted. And since you've been around the hobby so much in the last few years, what are some of the big changes that you have seen around the RPG hobby?
Well, yeah, I think that I feel like the internet has changed the world, right? It's made all of our lives very, very different in many, many different ways. And I think a lot of the biggest differences that I've seen in the RPG hobby and industry have come from the internet. So there are basically ways in which, I think that for the whole history of the hobby, there was a very particular way that companies worked and companies operated and companies reached customers. And there was a process. It involved a lot of capital, right? You needed a lot of money to be a publisher because you'd have to invest in a print run. There was no other way of getting, outside of maybe zines or something like that, there was no real way of getting RPGs to customers. So one of the kind of the biggest changes, which I guess is now almost a historic change, is the internet and the way that the internet continues to disrupt traditional RPGs, both in terms of the industry and the hobby. So things that I've seen, particularly in the last couple of years, I think online publishing platforms like DriveThruRPG and .io are really, really interesting in terms of opening up the industry to new creators, right? It's never been easier to publish your RPG, right? You can literally just type it up on your home PC, put it up on itch or on DriveThru as a PDF, and that's it, right? And that, I think, that's really shown the traditional industry just the kind of breadth of possibilities that are out there. They're just the range of games that we could be making, the range of customers that are interested in RPGs, and the type of RPGs that they're interested in. And also, like, the hobby is very iterative, and role-playing itself is very iterative. So these publishing platforms that allow you to upload much shorter games, you don't have to have a 300-page hardback book. You can just upload a 5-page PDF, let people download it for free, get feedback, adapt it, iterate it, improve it, and ultimately release it. And it's, it's an interesting model, I guess, for publishing your RPG. And it's very, very new. And I feel like it's really kind of revitalizing the RPG industry, having this vast new wave of really radically diverse writers and designers and artists coming into the hobby, creating in the hobby, and just building a career within the hobby. So I think that's very exciting.
I completely agree. I think that is exciting. Now, I guess, like I want to keep things positive. I feel it is a very positive thing, but you do hear sometimes people say that they're worried about that fracturing the market and making it harder for people to sell games or something like that. If there's, a free game on Drive-Thru-RPG, why not just get a free game instead of paying for my game? Have you come against kind of some of those thoughts and some of those ideas from people?
A friend of mine, Chris O'Neill, pointed out that RPGs are, from an economic standpoint, they're luxury products. And what that means is that they're not essential, right? Nobody is competing on price in RPGs, right? You can literally, as Monte Cook Games have shown with Invisible Sun, you can price your RPG at whatever price you want to. And if people want it, they will buy it. So I don't think that's the issue that maybe some people might think it is. I'm a big believer in, and this is something I've heard repeatedly since D&D 5e came out, is that a rising tide lifts all boats. Yeah. And I feel like the more people that are brought into the RPG hobby, the more people that are exposed to gaming and that, kind of realize what a fascinating, creative and fun medium and hobby it is. I think the better that is for all companies, because I think they're literally increasing the customer base. So yeah, I don't think that. I think like Drive-Thru-RPG have had pay what you want as an option now for years, and that hasn't necessarily impacted any. Certainly, I haven't seen an impact on PDF sales as a result of that. I think they're just different economic models for people depending on what stage they feel their game is at, or what they're trying to achieve with their game. So I think it's a really positive thing to be able to have all these different price points within the industry and have that be sustainable, which I think it is.
I'm glad to hear you kind of say that, and and I thank you for kind of wording it that way so the listeners could hear, because I do think that we can get trapped in kind of a negative mindset and this kind of an image of a pie that's being divided into little slices or something. And it's just not true. It's just not true at all. I think you're absolutely correct. Well, when you talked about Chris there, I've interviewed Chris on the podcast as well. And we talked about some of these things. But also your point about D&D 5e, I think is a critical one, because I think I had just heard something recently. It's saying that still the gateway to the hobby of tabletop role-playing is Dungeons and Dragons. Mm-hmm. But then after about 4 or 5 years of playing Dungeons and Dragons, a person then starts to look at other role-playing games. And I heard it kind of put in a way, as I can't remember who was saying it. I listened to a lot of podcasts, but they were saying, well, let Hasbro, let the biggest, one of the biggest toy companies in the world, let them spend all the money to onboard new people into the hobby. And then independent publishers can pick up the people then who...
Absolutely.
So you think that is correct as well?
Yeah, I mean, I have never seen certainly in my time kind of professionally in the industry, I don't know that I've ever seen it so big, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of conceptually, like there's just, there are whole, there's, a fascinating number of people now earning their living from RPGs, but not in the way that we traditionally would have, like not by being publishers or writers or artists, but being podcasters or being streamers, or suddenly there's this whole other way of earning an income in RPGs, of making the hobby your profession. And I mean, I really do have to say that seems to me to all have come from D&D 5e, right? I feel like they've really kind of championed the rise of this new digital infrastructure for sharing RPGs and for communicating what an RPG is. And I think that's something that we as an industry we just didn't have the funding to do that ourselves. And like you said, when you look at a company like Hasbro, they have marketing departments like full of people whose job it is to optimize all of these things to reach the most people. And that's fantastic for, like you said, for us smaller publishers, because we're then able to ride their coattails. We're able to kind of ride that wave and go. And if you are interested in playing a game that is about something other than, doing a dungeon crawl and, killing the monster, taking its stuff, there is this whole other industry of games out there that you can come to and you can try out. So yeah, I feel like, on balance, 5e has been fantastic for the hobby, and the industry. I think it's just it's changed it a lot, and I've seen some fear from people as a result of that, which is understandable. I mean, I think people are always kind of automatically a bit afraid of change, but ultimately it's just been such a boost for the hobby. It's really modernized it, right? It's taken this 40-year-old game and it's brought it to a whole new generation, and it's speaking to that generation in kind of digital and social media languages that generation understands, which I guess for me as a slightly older generation person, it's not always easy to meet younger people where they are and to communicate with them in a way that feels relevant to them.
No, I couldn't agree more, and I I understand your point. Although I am certainly older than you are, I do find myself on occasion nowadays going, "Oh, kids these days," and I'm like, "No, I haven't become one of them, have I?"
No, I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating that people will watch an RPG.
Oh gosh.
I really find that so fascinating, because it's just, for me, it's all about playing. Right?
Yeah.
I'm a player. That's what I've always done. And so the idea of sitting there and watching it is like,
Yeah.
But again, that's what I mean, in that, like, there's a whole generation that have grown up watching video game playthroughs, right? Yeah. And to them, it's just the same thing. And it's kind of, converting a lot of them and interesting and engaging a lot of them that we as traditional publishers just wouldn't have been able to reach at all,
Yeah. Yeah. And I've mentioned that, this a number of times on the podcast, that I did not see watching people play role-playing games ever becoming a thing. Like that it just did not occur to me, because, back, years ago, when I would be playing and somebody would say, "Oh, my friend wants to come along," and they just want to watch, I would just be like, "No, like they can come. Like, I'm not saying don't bring them, like,
play,
but play. Yeah. Like make them a character. We'll get them a character. Mm-hmm. We'll explain the stuff. It'll be okay. They can play." Mm-hmm. And because I was just like, because I've had people watch before and they get bored like in 2 seconds and they walk away, or they hate you because they're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm not doing anything. And it's like, well, yeah, you could be, just play with us or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so like, I wouldn't have even thought it was a thing. I would be like, no, people wouldn't do it. And of course now, I mean,
the thing is, I suppose when you think about it, it's no different to watching sport on TV, right? Versus playing sport. Like I imagine, I'm not a very sporty person, but I imagine that if you are sporty, then the idea of watching people play sport isn't as, you're like, why wouldn't you just play football or whatever?
Yeah. So. Yeah, but I think you are onto something there. Yeah, about watching people play baseball or maybe cricket for you over across the pond or whatever you guys watch. But I do agree. I think that's probably where it started, because you do see people, actually, some of the most athletic people I know watch a lot of sports, and then I do think there was a change kind of in the early mid 2000s where ESPN started, like poker became a sport for some reason.
Right. Yeah.
And you're just like,
exactly.
Like that caught me by surprise too. Like, what? Like how is that a sport? And
yeah, and that's interesting that you say that, because I love playing poker, but also I really like watching poker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I don't really care for either. But like, because I remember like being over at a friend's house or something in the early 2000s, and like somebody in the house has on poker, and I'm like, why would you watch that? I don't know. I guess it is just something, the change in our society where, I mean, we can watch anything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can pretty much watch anything you want, right? I mean, you can watch somebody build a house. You can watch somebody restore a house. You can watch somebody play poker. You can watch, somebody, talk about almost any topic that you can think of, from politics to, to archaeology to whatever, because we have, we're a kind of a watching society, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I mean about the generations coming up. Like, this is their environment. This is how they've grown up. They've grown up watching YouTube. If they have a question, they don't go to, say, Google or an encyclopedia. They go to YouTube and they find a YouTube video about it. So, like you said, they're consuming audience, right? They're used to consuming their knowledge and information, and I guess their kind of free time and their activities through videos, right? So it makes sense to them to learn about RPGs through videos. And actually, I remember being, when I was in college, I was very heavily involved with our college game society. And I remember trying to explain role playing to people. And, I've been trying for like nearly, probably not too far off, like 30 years now. And I still, it changes every time. I still, it is such a difficult thing to explain to people, right? To explain to people what you do. But if you watch it, right, you only need to watch like 5 or 10 minutes to be like, oh, right, okay, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's actually, it's the best possible distribution, the best possible distribution network for us, I think.
I've been in kind of the same boat with that, where I've tried to explain role-playing to people who have never even heard the concept. And fortunately, that's becoming easier and easier, because you could just say, why don't you check out this video? This guy they play and they show you how to play real quick or whatever. But yes. And as for me, like I said, trying to catch up, I was on Twitch a few weeks ago, just kind of exploring some different things, because I'm still new to the concept. And I remembered it was Thursday night and that Critical Role would be coming on. So I switched over to Critical Role. And I watched their viewer count go from 0 to 73,000.
What?
In about 9 to 12-ish minutes.
Oh my gosh.
Because they sent out a notification that they were going live.
Right. Yeah, to their audience. And
yeah.
I mean, that's, it's fascinating to me. It is essentially like on-demand TV, right? Yeah. Again, this is what we've become accustomed to. This is what the younger generations are growing up with. And this is just, there's an expectation that they can just watch whatever they want to, whenever they want to. But that's genuinely competing with television networks and television stations at this point. It's a massive, massive number of people.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
When you kind of look at like the Kickstarter that they did for, the Critical Role did for making a cartoon of their game, like, and there is actual, there's a massive, massive fan base there. and a massive audience who are willing to spend money
Mm-hmm.
on that concept.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
And again, and it's just from nowhere. Like, they're not publishers, they're not writers or artists. They're just GMs and players. It's like we finally found a way for GMs and players to become professionally involved in the hobby.
And I think that is just a totally new aspect as well. The idea that you can get paid to, be a dungeon master, paid to run games.
And then paid to play games.
Pay to play, yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that just blows my mind. I love playing RPGs, and I'm like, that seems like so much more fun than actually doing the work of making RPGs.
I think about that sometimes too. I'm like, why am I over here like stressing myself out trying to, release a new book and figure out all the kind of ins and outs of marketing and things like this when I could just play a game and make money.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of people forget. I think there are three key things to Critical Role, in their success, right? Of course, they're playing the most popular role-playing game on the planet.
Yeah.
So you're playing D&D. So obviously that's the most popular game. So there's going to be the most interest behind that. They're professional actors. So, as you can tell, as any listener of my show can tell, I'm not professional on the microphone. They are. And then two, I think one thing that people forget about is when they launched the show, they launched with a media partner on Geek and Sundry. And Geek and Sundry, I think even 5 years ago, Geek and Sundry was getting like maybe like a couple 100,000 visits per month. And then now, of course, Critical Role, their website is bigger than Geek and Sundry.
Geek and Sundry, I know.
Yeah, it gets more visits. I was checking those out a while back. I think Geek and Sundry is like 500,000 Critical per month. And then Critical Role or critroll.com is like 750,000 visits per month. It's just amazing that like where did that all come from, right? It's just amazing what just the thought. Even I've mentioned this sometimes on the show. Just going back to kind of the lull when I was in kind of junior high and high school here, when there was a lull in role playing games, kind of D&D kind of faded to the background a little bit, and we had West End Star Wars game system. And it was really hard to find somebody like at school who even played role-playing games. I remember, I've told the story before, but I walk into a study hall like in 8th grade, and there is one of the kids, he's reading a Ravenloft book. Right. And I just walked right over to him. I was like, do you play D&D? And he's like, yes. And we've been friends now for like, 30 some years or something, right?
That's just fantastic.
Because there was just so few people playing it. And just to think that 750,000 people go to critroll.com each month. I know it's like 12 million or more go to dnd.com, the official website at Wizards each month. And then to think that on a Thursday night for like 4 hours, 73,000 people watch people play Dungeons and Dragons.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting. It's because that is really, I think that the media and the investors will always find the money, right? They'll always find where the money is. And you can really see role playing, like you said. I mean, I kind of came into it in the late 90s, or the kind of mid to late 90s, when, the White Wolf bubble was just kind of really taking off. But then I was there for the kind of first years of the 2000s, where, like you said, D&D was kind of a bit on the decline, and there was kind of a lull, and it was difficult to find players and difficult to find. There were still good games, but it was on a bit of the down low. Having gone from like being featured on like ET, right? Having been really, really in the public consciousness in the 80s. There was just this massive kind of lull then, and it's coming back again. I'm hearing people making gamer jokes, right? Yeah. People making jokes about D&D, jokes about RPGs, in popular culture on television shows and stuff. And it's, and it's like I was saying earlier, that's all 5e has really swelled that whole public awareness and made it, I'm reluctant to say cool, but it certainly made it a lot less uncool than maybe it used to be back in the day. So it's interesting. It's really changed the perception of it, I think.
Yeah. I know in the late 80s, early 90s, and mid 90s, if you had to be careful who you told you were playing role-playing games sometimes, because they were just like, there was just just some kind of perception about them. If people had heard of them anyway, like I would mention them and then people would never have heard of them. And then, or you would mention something and they would know, or I'd mention Dungeons and Dragons and they would know kind of the fabricated news story about the kid's disappearance, or,
they would already have a negative preconception.
Yeah. And, but it is interesting. And I have talked a little about this on the podcast. It does seem like the kind of like the geeks have won to a degree, right? That
didn't the Bible say that the geek shall inherit the earth?
Well, it may have been meek, but I mean, I could go for geek.
Like that,
I could go for geek.
Yeah. It really does seem like that. Just having, being one of those people who's always been a geek. I was just so massively uncool and weird and odd back in school, and now all of the things that people aspire to my level of nonsensical knowledge about the internet and computers and tech and geekdom in general.
Yeah, I had a similar experience in school. It was. I was kind of always talking about things that very few people understood or would admit to knowing, I don't know, that, something would come up in class and you're like, ooh, I actually know the name of that little creature that sat next to Jabba the Hutt. His name was Salacious Crumb. But if I say it now in this context, I'm just not going to live that down. I'm going to be even weirder than people already think people already think I am. And then now, everybody I meet wants to talk about Star Wars or something.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. But anyway, so the geeks have won, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
I think so. So too.
Now we just need to make sure that we create a better world than we inherited with our newfound power and influence.
Yes. But sadly, groups that usually come into power, oppressed groups that come into power become oppressors. So we have a hard road behind us. So we got to remember not to remember that the geek should welcome all.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But and we've talked quite a bit of about the changes and how the internet certainly. I think there was probably a handful of people in 1993 or 94 who realized what this was going to do, but I think a lot of us didn't realize how the internet was going to touch like every facet of our lives, and let alone just we've been talking about a hobby and an industry that is. I guess like a niche of a niche, right? It's within, or maybe there's three in there because you have games, you have the gaming industry, and then you niche it down further. I don't know how many niches you have to go down, but we are, we're talking about tabletop role-playing games that makes up a fraction of a gaming industry that includes video games, board games, which have exploded as well, and war games, and all kinds of other strategy games, all kinds of things like that, down to where we can talk about people making their living doing something that 25 years ago you would have had a hard time pulling 3 or 4 people together to have a gaming group.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now, as you know, since you've been seeing these changes kind of and how the hobby has changed, especially with people watching. And since you are, a publisher, how have some of these changes affected the industry? I know you had mentioned that, the barrier to publishing something is a computer or a device, not even a computer, a device and the internet. But what other changes have you seen that are really kind of driving the industry now, that have you maybe thinking about during your lunchtime or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, like again, like the instinct to watch RPGs, right, is such a massive shift for us as publishers. Like, very few of us publishers are set up to produce that kind of content. Very, very few of us. Certainly in the kind of the more trad RPG space. It's, we're very comfortable with words, I guess. Some of us are very comfortable with graphics, with images, with design, but it's a whole other, it's a whole other medium that we're needing to adapt to. Yeah, so it's really, it's changing the people who are, I guess it's interesting because like all of that infrastructure can exist almost independently of publishers. In that, like you said, like a lot of the bigger streams are playing D&D. That's what they're playing. So in theory, there's now a whole sub industry which only needs that one game that they already have. And are still earning a living from it, and it's growing and it's developing. It's still not finished its growth phase, I guess, from its release, which is great. Like, it's doing so well. But yeah, it's kind of, that's, I guess I would be a little bit nervous that people would, I guess, adapt to watching RPGs rather than playing. And I kind of look at, say, something like soccer, like I was talking about earlier, where I think a lot more people, considerably more people, watch soccer than play soccer. Yeah. And it just kind of seems like an inevitability to me that we are going to move to being an industry where a lot more people watch RPGs than play RPGs. And I don't... I'm not kind of making a judgment as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just, I think it is a thing that's going to happen. And, I do believe and hope, or hope and believe maybe, that there will be a place for other publishers in that kind of future industry. And yeah, it's a big shift. And it's, I guess, for me as a role player, one of the things that I love about it is finding new games, right? Yeah. There's nothing I love more than hearing a really, really grabby concept and finally getting to sit down at a table with it and kick the tires of it, give it a test play. And yeah, I kind of, a lot of people are coming into RPGs and being very active members of the role-playing community without that experience or without that interest even. They're just consuming RPGs in a very, very different way to what I'm interested in, say. So I'm really interested in novelty. Like, obviously I've got my classic games that I will just always play. But I like new games, right? I'm excited by new games. I'm excited by seeing the way that role-playing games have changed and evolved over time. Even in the time that I've been playing games, they've changed massively, absolutely massively. And I think that's great. I think I'm really excited about that. I think it's a really positive thing. Yeah. But I don't know that you would get that same level of evolution and development of the hobby in an industry which was predominantly focused on delivering video content, say. I feel like they will absolutely innovate, right? There'll be a second critical role that will do something different. but it will be within that, within that video television production sphere rather than innovating within the actual gameplay itself. So yeah, that's kind of that's an interesting kind of idea to me. And I think that there'll always be enough people like me who are interested in novelty, right? Who are always excited by a new game. It's like a new thing is a shiny thing, right? And I think that there will always be people like that rather than people who are kind of happy to play different variations on the same game. Yeah. So I think we'll probably be okay. But it is kind of it's hard to say how. I guess I find it hard to say whether, like, the extent to which that will impact us over, say, the next 5 years.
I do have the sense that it will be okay, like you said, but your kind of your soccer analogy there was interesting, and I hadn't really thought about that too much because, if you take, a soccer team and you say, well, obviously vastly more people watch soccer than play it, but the soccer teams can still make money because you have to pay to watch them. Mm-hmm. They can sell jerseys that people who want to support the teams and things like that. Whereas the role-playing games, if you're not playing, why buy the book? And, that can obviously hit the industry, in a way. Now, I do know of some people who just say, well, they just don't have any time to play, but they enjoy buying new RPGs and reading them. And that's like their hobby. Some people read mystery novels or something. They read RPGs. And so that kind of, stays in there with the industry. But it is an interesting thought to think about if people are just watching, but they have to want to play too, right?
Mm. Well, I think that's a great point about there's definitely a whole subsection of people in the hobby, like you said, who are buying RPGs with no real intention of playing them, right? That they are just buying them to read for the joy of it. Mm-hmm. And I guess I've never really thought of that in the same way as people who are watching RPGs, but it is the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. It's putting your own spin on what the hobby is providing and consuming it in a way that is satisfactory to you, if not necessarily how it was. I don't want to say how it was expected, because I think that certainly when we're publishing books, we're always publishing with kind of we're writing and publishing with kind of two eyes, like the eye to providing easy to grok, kind of very accessible, flick throughable, intuitive instructions for how to run the game, but also an interesting read, right? And you're always walking that kind of, the two are, I don't want to say opposites, but they're very, very different forms of writing, right? Writing an instruction manual versus, flowery purple prose kind of thing. So so you're always kind of trying to balance the tension between those two things. And that is, and that also kind of branches into another thing, which is that I'm already starting to hear people talking about designing for streaming. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. So there are people working on games that are, again, with that in mind, that are kind of targeted towards being streamed, towards being playable in that way, and games that are interesting to watch more so than interesting to play. And and that's good, because I feel like that will hopefully again remind people in that space that there are multiple games and that different games have different things to offer. Yeah, and different potential.
The person who invented basketball probably thought more people would play than watch it, right?
I don't think anyone's ever. Well, that's probably not true. Yeah. Maybe beach volleyball or something. But I'm not sure if anyone's invented the sport specifically thinking, "Oh yeah, this will be a good thing to watch."
Yeah. Yeah. And then, you had mentioned streaming. I think it was, James Introcaso and a group of creators who have done Burn Bright, which is, I think it's called Burn Bright. I think it is just a game that is only available on Roll20. So you can only get it and play it if you are on Roll20, and it is geared to somebody using it there on the computer with all of its maps and everything kind of already set up. I don't know much about it, but I know it's all set up just to be used on a platform, an online playing platform. And then I would have to think one of the added benefits to that is it's pretty easy to stream because you have some visuals and things there behind it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's another, I guess, aspect of the industry that's changed. And, particularly at the time of recording this here in 2020, so many more people are now, like I live in a very remote part of Ireland, and there are no role players in my hometown. And so I've been gaming online. I've been doing all of my role playing online for the last 5 or 6 years, right? And that's just kind of how things are for me. And then when we went into kind of lockdown in March, suddenly everyone's in-person gaming groups shut down and everyone was gaming online.
Yep.
And a lot of people were like, oh, this is not, some people were like, I don't like this. This is not the same. I don't want to do this. But a lot of people were like, actually, this is no different. And now, instead of having, Mary and Jane, who live down the road from me in my game, I can now have my friend Jessica, who lives in Asia, in my game. You're no longer kind of limited to geographical location.
Yeah.
You can play with people all around the world. And so the virtual tabletops and gaming online, like role playing online, and where that's going to go is an interesting idea to me, particularly for me, because most of Pelgrane's games, except for maybe 13th Age and Knights of Black Agents, most of our games are quite theatre of the mind based. So they're very imaginative. They're much more narrative focused than, say, dice rolling focused. But you don't necessarily need virtual tabletops, like the full range of functionality that virtual tabletops have. You can play our games over Zoom or Skype very, very comfortably. So it's interesting to me to know how I keep meaning to check out them, right? Because I'm interested to see how something designed for virtual play predominantly, or designed with virtual play in mind first, works.
Yeah. And of course, I had kind of the experience you were describing. Me and my group, we had played in person for years. And in March, it all shut down. So we moved online. And the first few times, I think we had some technical glitches and we were trying to get used to things. But after now, a number of months doing it, I don't know, even though we live kind of in the same area, I don't know if we're going to go back to doing it in person. It's just so much easier, isn't it? It is because you can, you can run home from work and put stuff down and just flip on the computer.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it cuts out a 20-minute drive or a 25-minute drive or a 10-minute drive even to somebody's house, and then of course the host, right? They have to clean their house, and they have to, and
of course,
and then, on the computer, you don't have to.
Potentially, kind of child minding functionality and stuff,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it's just it's made people. I think one of the things that is. You talked earlier about wanting to keep things positive. One of the real things that 2020 has shown me is that communities will always tend towards supporting each other, right? And they will tend towards helping. And, we really saw that in lockdown, where a lot of, game stores and publishers and, people in the community, like kind of fans, all were frantically talking to each other, saying, what can we do for you? How can we help you in this time? And in particular, I think that's been really obvious in terms of online play. I think that people have been so much more forgiving of technical glitches or internet issues, or kind of having to rush out and take the washing off the line or whatever in the middle of a game. A lot more so than they would have been during in playing together in real life, because everyone kind of understands that this is all very new to most of us, and people have just given each other space and given each other the permission to make mistakes and the permission to mess things up and the permission to have issues. And I think that's been really positive for games. It's certainly I've noticed a lot of the games that I've been in have been more kind of relaxed as people have gotten more used to playing and running online. So I think that's good. I think it is kind of helping. I think that there are some really helpful and useful lessons that we can take from gaming online into gaming in person, if that's ever a possibility again.
Oh, gosh. I hope it is. I hope it is.
Sorry, I was doing so well at being positive, and then
I know. I know I had mentioned being positive, and that's probably because I am a natural pessimist. So I really try to stay positive whenever I can. But yeah, and I think we will, but we will game in person again. But I think you're absolutely right. I think there are some, just some other things that we are, kind of, just showing a little bit of, I don't know, maybe the word is grace to people who are just like, okay, well, hey, we're going to try to play, once a week or whatever. If you're going to be 15 minutes late or whatever, just let me know. Right. Or if your internet, if there's a bad storm and your internet's bad, just let us know. Just message us and we'll work with it. And I think that is, I think I've seen some of that as well. And I know, in my gaming group, we have kind of experienced that, whereas, and we excuse things that, if we were sitting there in person, we'd probably be annoyed, but, on the computer, it doesn't matter too much.
Exactly. I mean, there is very much, I think, a kind of a communal sense of just giving it a go, right? Just being together, and the importance of us trying it and doing it, and us all being in it together, and it being really hard on everyone. There's just so much more kind of understanding, and I see that a lot as well on social media, where people are kind of going, just, drink water, eat food, take a deep breath, right? Just we can all get through this, and there's it's felt really quite a supportive year. In some ways. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree with all the upheaval. There has, if we just take a second to look around, I think we can see that there are a lot of still positive, if not beautiful things still in the world, and we can take those in as well. Well, now we've been talking for a while, and we've talked about. I just said upheavals. We've been talking about just huge, massive changes in our society, in the world, in the hobby, in the industry of tabletop role-playing games. How are you, as a business leader here, navigating Pelgrane Press through some of these changes?
It's been. I mean, it's been super challenging. I think when we originally went into, so I traveled to quite a lot of conventions myself, and the rest of the team also attended a lot of conventions. Like I said, that's really important for us. As we kind of sat there in March, I remember having a conversation. We have a Pelgrane Slack that we all kind of talk on, and I remember Gar and Robin both saying, there is not going to be, an Origins, there's not going to be a Gen Con. And I was laughing. I was like, oh, for God's sake, it's just the cold. But if it were serious, and, they could kind of see it coming. And so, we've really, again, I'm very little bit worried about sounding Pollyanna-ish here, but really, I have kept things going with the overwhelming help and support of both the Pelgrane team and our community. Kind of straight away, like the first thing that we did when the world went into lockdown kind of at the end of March was we reached out to our community on social media and on our website, and we said, look, what would you like to see from us, right? This is an unprecedented time. Everything is uncertain. We don't really know what to do here. We don't know, like, what can we do for you? What do you need from us as an RPG publishing company? What can we do for you? And the things that people said, the things that the community said, were they wanted essentially a community hub. They wanted connection. So we set up a Discord server that's been running now since the end of March. Set up a Discord server. They also said that they missed conventions, right? So they missed things like panels and seminars and getting the opportunity to ask questions and to chat with us. So we basically set up. We already had a YouTube channel, but it was pretty bare, to be honest. And Robin Laws has really taken the lead on getting more content up there. So we've run a lot of seminars. We've done some little individual pieces where just like us talking about our favorite monsters or giving GM advice or that kind of thing. So we're trying to release a lot of video content on there. And just make ourselves available to the community. And another thing as well, like 2 other things that people said, which proved to be very, very important, as well as the video game aspect, were gaming with their families. Because obviously people were gone into lockdown. A lot of people would still prefer to play in person, but the only people they had available were their families. So we're working on
horror.
Horror, exactly. Yeah. It's like, oh no, I have to role play with my children. What am I going to do? So we started adopting Gumshoe for younger players. So Gar's working on that at the moment. We play tested it there a month or 2 ago, and he's working on finishing that off. And also our one-to-one. We have a lot of games that are for one player and one GM. So again, people wanted to develop that line more. So, because they were maybe living in 2-people households. Yeah. So it was easier to kind of find one player than a whole group. And then online gaming was the big thing. They wanted to be able to play our games more online. So Noah Lloyd has been working on Astral Tabletop and with Roll20 and with Fantasy Grounds, and I think latterly the Foundry. And he's working on kind of getting more adventures, more character sheets, and more support on there for our games. So, and all of these things are things that I think we had always, as a company, planned to do at some point, but the kind of the pandemic really, like I said, listening to the team, listening to our community, really told us what was important to them during this just ridiculous time. So we've kind of really focused on that and on staying connected, and I think that is a massive, I live alone and I work remotely. So I really understand how important it is to feel connected when you're self-isolating or when you're geographically distant from people. And I have known that for a while. But I guess the team and the community started learning it more when they went into lockdown, when suddenly they didn't have access to their cities or their friends or whatever. So we've really, just stayed connected as a team and stayed connected as a community. And, even if we're just talking nonsense, we're doing it together. And I think that being there as a support network for each other both kind of professionally through the games that we're making for people, but also on a personal level as other humans going through a really big time in history. Yeah. I think it's very important for everyone to just stay connected. So yeah, that's kind of, I think we have been doing that quite well, and that has kept us all, don't know if sane is quite the right word, but it's kept us going. Yeah, it's really kept us going, and it's helped us kind of come through a lot of the more difficult times. We're still doing okay. We're kind of looking forward to a future of getting back to conventions, but even if that doesn't happen for another year or two, the changes that we've made as a company, producing more video content for YouTube. At Gen Con online there, we launched basically our Twitch channel. So we're now looking to start getting regular shows on our Twitch channel. We want to start doing Noah has this great idea for doing a kind of a Saturday night horror kind of thing. So doing one shots of horror games and maybe getting guest GMs. So, so we're kind of looking forward to working within this new restricted gaming environment, I think. And with the help of the community, we're looking okay to do that.
As you were mentioning, I think, yes, obviously, 2020 has made people change a lot of their plans and move up things. And because I do think, obviously, it's always easier to do the things we've done in the past, right? And,
yes, exactly.
And yeah,
there are some well-worn treads in the in the ground.
Yeah, and so we put some things on the list, right? YouTube channel would be great.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right now, a YouTube channel is the only way I could reach any of my customers or something, right? Yeah, it kind of changes. It
really does. It changes your priorities and it changes your focus. And, and as a kind of being more on the business side or the production side, it's more creative for me to be having to think of new ideas for how to actually do things, Yeah. So that's fun.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think that is a very healthy way to look at it, instead of looking at it as problems that, the conventions were canceled, and looking at it in a negative way, to look at it in a positive way. This is a time to figure out new things. It's a time to do new things, learn new skills. It's the time to, try something new and see where that goes. Because like we've already said, I totally miss watching role-playing games as a thing. So maybe this is a time when we can learn something new that we were missing out on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think it's a good time to learn.
Yeah. And by the way, I was able to attend a few of the Pelgrane Press's sessions I think it was on Zoom, that are now on YouTube, on game mastering and some different topics like that. And they were excellent. And it was just absolutely great also to being able to ask questions to Ken and, to Ken Hite and Robin Laws and yourself. I think were on there answering questions and things. It was just really excellent panels, really excellent information. And I think, this is kind of opening up the world, right? Instead of having to go to a convention, you can get some of that same really good content on some, really on some YouTube channels, and you don't have to miss out on that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it just makes it a lot more accessible to people who wouldn't not conventionally be able to, but who wouldn't traditionally be able to access conventions, either for financial reasons or for, accessibility reasons. Yep. It's, I feel like it's a really good thing that we're moving so much of our content online, just because the internet is a great equalizer. Like you said earlier, once you have internet access, then you have the world at your fingertips. So
yeah. And you just never even know, right? I mean, there are people who may need that information, 3 months from now,
yeah, exactly.
who can go and watch it. Or there are people who, are like, where the way my job works or where I live in the world, I can only see things at like 3 a.m. So I need to, having it on YouTube and waiting till they can watch it on a time that suits their needs is way better. So, I mean, it just opens up the potential for even more viewers and more people to experience the content as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, Kat, I've had you on here for a long time. I could keep asking you questions about the RPGs all day. Well, I could talk to anybody about RPGs, I think, for all day. But
yeah, same.
yeah. So, and you've been mentioning Pelgrane Press and all these things that you're doing. Where can people find Pelgrane Press and view some of this awesome content that you're creating?
So, our website is pelgranepress.com. And that's always kind of the main place that all of our stuff filters through. But then we're on all of the social medias, usually is at Pelgrane Press. So we're on Twitter at Pelgrane Press. We're on Facebook, where we're Pelgrane Press. I think we're on Instagram as Pelgrane Press. We've got a Gumshoe RPGs community on Facebook as well, and a 13th Age RPG community on Facebook. And like I said, we've set up a Discord server now, so we're also there. And we've got a YouTube channel, which is probably Pelgrane Press, or I'm sure if you do a search in YouTube, you can find it. And we've got some really cool like playlists and stuff set up. So if you're interested in particular aspects of the company, like interviews or particular game lines, we have it all kind of set up in playlists there. And we're just starting to move on to Twitch and to creating more Twitch content. But ultimately, again, that'll all be backed up onto YouTube. So our YouTube channel is probably the best place for all of our video content at the moment.
Okay. And I will make sure that I will link up to your website and your social channels in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who's listening to this episode right now, if you head over to dicegeeks.com, check out the show notes for this episode, you will find links to all of those things, unless I forget one or two that Kat has mentioned. Hopefully all of those things. I will try to link up all of those things in the show notes so you can find those there. I guess one quick, just last question, Kat. What is something that is really cool that is coming down the pipe in Pelgrane Press that somebody would really like to check out, maybe?
We're working on so many really, really cool things. Like I said, Gar is doing an adaptation of Gumshoe for children, and he's also doing a Gumshoe one-to-one fantasy game. But the kind of, I guess, don't want to play favorites, but the biggest thing we have coming down the pipeline, I think, is Kevin Culp's and Emily Dresner's Swords of the Serpentine. So that's basically swords and sorcery Gumshoe. And it's inspired by like Fritz Lieber, Terry Pratchett, and Robert E. Howard. So kind of fantasy RPG, but kind of a lot of, there's a lot of kind of political stuff going on in this kind of fantasy city, and a lot of kind of guilds and intrigue and skullduggery, death, sorcery, all of the kind of the good stuff that you'd look for in a swords and sorcery game.
All right. Well, I will try to link up to those as well so people can check those out if they're available at the time this episode goes live, because they sound amazing and we don't want anybody to miss those. All right. Well, Kat, thank you so much for being generous with your time once again to come on the show and for me to talk your ear off about RPGs. So just thank you so much for being on the show today. Sure.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, guys, there you have it. It was a pleasure to have Kat back on the show. It is always a privilege just to tap into her knowledge of the RPG industry and the RPG hobby. As you learned in the episode, Pelgrane Press is up to a lot of cool things. So head over to dicegeeks.com, find the show notes for this episode. You will find links to pelgranepress.com, to all of their social media, to their YouTube channel and their Twitch, and some of their amazing RPGs. If you are looking for innovative tabletop role-playing games, you want to check out Pelgrane Press. Now, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You'll get 10 free dungeon maps. You'll never miss an episode of this show. And each and every Friday, you'll get an email update from me telling you what is going on in the wild universe that I like to call Dice Geeks. Now, guys, if you enjoyed today's episode with Kat and you like listening to my interviews with other tabletop RPG creators, then please consider supporting the show in some way. You can tell a friend, you can share it on social media, you can rate the show wherever you're listening to it or leave a review. And if you are able, you could support the show financially at patreon.com/dicegeeks. I just want to thank you so much for listening. And until next Wednesday, keep gaming.